Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Enrique Morones, and I'm glad to be back here at your school. I'm actually in the middle of something called Caravan for Peace. We're traveling from San Diego to Washington, D.C. It's been in the news a lot. We've been in Chicago for a couple of days, and the person that's leading this caravan is a guy named Javier Sicilia. Javier Sicilia is a well-known poet in Mexico whose son was killed last year in the violence in Mexico due to the drug policy. You know, we have a very difficult situation right now where in the last 6 years, 70,000 people have been killed in Mexico. 70,000 people have been killed in Mexico due to the drug violence, which is enhanced by the U.S. demand for drugs. So the number one cause for that is the U.S. demand for drugs, and the cartels are fighting over who gets to bring the drugs into Mexico. And the weapons that are going down there to kill the people come from the United States. So that's why we're doing a caravan for peace here in the United States. Yesterday we did a march. We went through a Latino community and an African American community that we culminated in a beautiful ceremony with both communities here in Chicago. And so that's why I'm here today. We started on August 12th and we get to Washington, D.C. on September 12th. Well, very possibly we'll be with President Obama, somebody that I've met with several times before. But today I'm going to talk about Border Angels. You should all have a brochure, and if you don't have one, I'll give you one. Border Angels is an organization that I started back in 1986. And I'm very proud of my roots. I'm 100% Mexican, born in San Diego, California. My dad is from Mexico City. My mom is from Culiacan, Sinaloa. My older brother and sister were born in Mexico, and I was born in San Diego. I used to be in professional baseball with the San Diego Padres. I left that in 2001 to focus exclusively on this. And the way that Border Angels got started was in 1986. A friend of mine from El Salvador said, Enrique, if you're collecting things and taking them to some of the needier people in Tijuana, how about the needy people here in San Diego? You know, where I live. San Diego and Tijuana are right at the border. You got the biggest border city along the U.S.-Mexican border is San Diego, 3 million people. And on the Mexican side is Tijuana, with 2 million people. You're often collecting things and taking them down there. How about the people that live here in San Diego? And I said, what are you talking about? I live in a working class neighborhood, similar to all of you. And she says, no, I live in a very wealthy neighborhood, but there's migrants that live in the canyons. This is back in 1986. There was no wall back then. No wall that we have now separating the two countries. So she said, where I live in Carlsbad, there's migrants that live in the canyons. So I started going into those canyons back in 1986. And I couldn't believe what was going on. You have women and children and families living down there. And I said, how could the most powerful economy on the face of the earth have people living in this situation? And that's when I had to make a decision that you have to make every single day. We've all seen people out on the street that maybe need some help. And I know I've tried to act like I don't see them. You know, you walk across the street, or you say, oh, that person deserves to be in that situation, and you kind of let it go. Or number 3, you try to do the right thing. You try to help them out. Well, that particular day, when I was in the canyons in San Diego, I decided to do something about it. And that's how Border Angels was born, back in 1986. So what happened was I started going into those canyons and bringing food and water and ministering to the people that lived down there. And everything changed. A few years later, 5 years later, I moved to Los Angeles. And when I was in Los Angeles, there was a lot of turmoil in Los Angeles, similar to what we see going on in Arizona and in Alabama and in other parts of the country today. A lot of racial profiling, a lot of people of color being pulled over and picked on and so forth. And when this was happening in Los Angeles, there was a particular young man that was pulled over by the police, taken out of his car, and almost beat to death. He was an African-American man, and what was unusual about that was not that was going on. Sadly, that's what goes on today with African-Americans, Latinos, and others. What was unusual was that it was caught on film. Because now you all have cell phone cameras and all that. Back then, that didn't exist. This young man was named Rodney King. So I was living in Los Angeles when that happened, and there was an uproar. The people got very upset. They go, how can this continue to happen? People of color being picked on. You're all familiar with that. So there was riots in the streets of Los Angeles. I lived through all that. My girlfriend lived in the San Fernando Valley, which is maybe an hour from where I lived in LA. And when I'd be coming back, I would be pulled over all the time, search for weapons and those types of things. Because according to some law enforcement, they say only people of color commit crimes, which of course we know is ridiculous. People of all communities commit crimes. So we'd be pulled over all of the time, and when this incident happened, I said there needs to be peace, because this could get out of control. There was riots in the streets of Los Angeles. Martial law. You couldn't drive around after 10 o'clock at night. So we created an event, myself and 2 other people, called Reencuentro, to bring the communities together. Because after all, like the great late Martin Luther King taught us, another king, injustice here is injustice everywhere. And what was happening to Rodney King was wrong. So we needed to do something to bring peace to Los Angeles. So we had this reencuentro event where we brought all the communities together. And just before we had the event, the person that was going to be the godfather of the event, somebody that I had worked with very closely, passed away. Some of you are familiar with him. His name is Cesar Chavez. So when Cesar Chavez passed away, his wife Elena said, Enrique, we want to do something to honor my husband. Back then there was no Cesar Chavez schools, Cesar Chavez streets that we have today. She goes, we would like to have a Cesar Chavez street here in LA. So she said, would you mind if at your big encuentro event, reencuentro, we have a table to sign petitions to get this going? I go, no, of course we'd be happy to help. So we helped with that, and as a result of that, Mrs. Chavez, Elena said, Enrique, we're going to have a celebration, we'd like you to come. So I go to it, and this woman was sitting next to me, and she said, Enrique, I'm really interested in what you're doing in the canyons. How come I've never heard of it? And I said, because I want to do the right thing. I just want to do the right thing. I don't want any attention. She goes, people need to know what's going on. My husband died for what he was doing. And at this event that I was sitting at, there was this other woman, and she was going, my husband died for what he was doing. And what you're doing is something that has a lot of passion. We need to let people know about it. Are you thinking about moving back to San Diego where you were born? And I said, I am. So I moved back down to San Diego the very next year in 1994. That woman that was inspiring me was Ethel Kennedy. Her husband, Bobby Kennedy, who was assassinated in 1968, as was Martin Luther King in 1968. So I moved back down to San Diego. And when I moved back down to San Diego, it was a watershed year. It was 1994. In 1994, there was a lot of things happening that have affected what's happening today. In 1994, there was a free trade agreement between the three great countries of North America, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, named the North American Free Trade Agreement, which allowed commerce to cross borders, but not people. So what happened was, the Walmarts got bigger, and the people that were the neediest people became poorer. And the people that used to grow their own coffee and corn and so forth in Mexico could continue to grow, but they couldn't sell it because the U.S. products were cheaper. So there was a big migration north. And people started coming to this country like never before. And what happened was, there was no legal way for them to come in. Some of the people, not in this room, but some of the people here in this city that have European backgrounds, when their forefathers and foremothers came, there was a statute that said, give me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses. We don't have that. We have a wall. We have a wall that in 1994 was begun to be built. That wall is a wall between San Diego and Tijuana, which is called Operation Gatekeeper. That started in 1994. So what happened was, instead of being able to cross from Tijuana to San Diego, now you had to go around the wall. So you have NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, Operation Gatekeeper. You had a bill, a very racist bill, which is really the foundation for these racist bills that you see in the country today, like the bill in Arizona, Senate Bill 1070, or HR 4437 that we saw from Wisconsin back in 2005. And these bills would deny the children of undocumented people to be able to receive education or health care. Today we have the DREAM Act situation. Back then it was even worse. The kids couldn't even go to school. If you were sick, you couldn't even go to the hospital. What fault is it of the kids that their parents brought them across the border without papers? It's not the kids' fault. They were punished. That was 1994. That was Proposition 187. Like these other bills, it passed, but like these other bills, it was blocked because it was against the Constitution of the United States. And in 1994, you have NAFTA, Proposition 187. You have the Operation Gatekeeper, and you have the Zapatista movement. Subcomandante Marcos rises up in southern Mexico, in Chiapas, and says, we have rights too. All of this happened in 1994. This is significant. You have this chart over here that you'll learn about later. It talks about significant dates. Well, 1994 was a significant date. All these things were going on. So in 1994, I moved back down to San Diego at the request of Mrs. Kennedy, and I started being more at the forefront of these issues, of this immigration issue. So I came back to San Diego, and before the wall was built, 1 or 2 people would die every month crossing the border. 1 or 2 people. Since the wall was built in October of 1994, 1 or 2 people die every day. 10,000 human beings have died crossing the border since they built this wall. And here you are, a lot of you have immigrant backgrounds and so forth, not all of you, because we know that everybody in this country does not come from an immigrant family. Some people were brought here by force. Some people are already here, like my dad's side, I'm Aztec. We've been here for thousands of years. But in 1994, the United States decided to build this wall. And in the previous decade, Ronald Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Now the U.S. is building a wall. Like I said, 1 or 2 people would die every month. Now 1 or 2 people would die every day. Marco Antonio Villaseñor was one of those people. He was a 5-year-old little boy. And he crossed with his dad for the number one reason people come. The number one reason most of you are here today. Economic opportunity. Your parents, maybe your grandparents came to this, maybe Chicago or into this country because they wanted to put food on the table. Either to send it back to the country of their roots or to send it back someplace because they wanted to feed their family or they brought their family with them. So what happened with Marco Antonio was no exception. His dad brought him, and as he came across the border, Marco Antonio, a 5-year-old little boy, became very thirsty. So he asked his father for some water, and his father wouldn't give him any water. So he asked the next man, and the next man, and the next man. He asked 18 men for water. Neither of these men would give the little boy water. And why would they not give the little boy water? They were already dead. These 18 men died, and Marco Antonio Villaseñor died. 19 human beings. Simply because they wanted to put food on their table. It's a universal human right to be able to cross borders looking for work. They died. There's no legal way for them to come into the country. But it's not only men and little boys, it's also women. Because the number 2 reason people cross, the number 1 reason is economic opportunity, still true today. The number 2 reason is family reunification. They want to be with their relatives. Some of you are here because maybe your uncle came first or whomever. Well, in this case, Lucrecia Dominguez. Lucrecia Dominguez wanted to come to this country to be with her husband. And she could not get a visa either. So she contracted a smuggler. And that smuggler says, okay, I'll cross you, but don't bring those 2 little kids with you. Jesus, her 15-year-old son, or Nora, the 7-year-old daughter. Why not? The smuggler said, because if you cross them, they're going to slow us down. And the Border Patrol might catch us. But the next day, she brought the 2 kids, so the smuggler said, okay, pay me for the 2 kids, and I'll bring them across. So she paid $1,500 for each one, $4,500 for the 3. And there was another group of migrants, and as they're crossing the desert, the 2 children did slow them down. So the smuggler says, I'm not giving you your money back. I told you not to bring them. And he abandons Lucrecia and her 2 children, and they take off. Lucrecia is with her 2 children, Jesus and Nora. And as they're walking across the desert, Lucrecia, the mother, literally dies in the arms of Jesus, her 15-year-old son, Jesus. This is happening every day. And this has got to stop. 10,000 human beings have died just because they want to have a better life. All of you want to have a better life. Your parents want you to have a better life. These people are no different. Many of you can relate to these stories because you know your story is very similar to that. My story is similar to that. So in 1994, we shifted our focus from just going to the canyons, where we've been going to the canyons to see the migrants that live there since 1986, to going to the desert to place water. We started doing that around 1996. I started with the Padres in 95. I was there from 95 to 2001. My last year in baseball, I was invited to a television show that many of you are familiar with. We weren't called Border Angels. We didn't have a name. But in 2001, Sábado Gigante, Don Francisco, most of you know that show, they called me. They said, we want you to come on our show. So I went on the show, Sábado Gigante. And as I'm on the show, Don Francisco says, El Ángel de la Frontera, the Border Angel. And I said, that's too presumptuous for an individual. I don't want to be called the Border Angel, but I like the name for the group. So we became Ángeles de la Frontera, or Border Angels. That's what we're called, Border Angels. So we went from a small group of about this size to a large group. Now we're over 2,500 people. We're all volunteers. And I focus all of my time on the Border Angels work now. So Border Angels has grown. I spoke here a couple of years ago to the entire school. We've had contact with some of the students since then. We have a very close relationship with the Pilsen Wellness Center. And we continue to go across the country and to other countries to talk about this work. Because people really need to step up and help their fellow man. There's a lot of people that like to talk about doing the right thing, but most people don't do the right thing. It's just talk. And that's why, like on the Caravan for Peace with Javier Sicilia, we're out there sharing testimonies of the people that have died. There's a woman with us that lost 5 of her children, another one that lost 6. When they tell these stories, believe me, there's a lot of tears in the rooms, and the message gets to a lot of people, maybe that right person that will change the policies of what we're going through on the Caravan for Peace. One of the themes